And at this point, queen of d3 was played in a correspondence game a couple of years ago, getting out of the way and threatening the knight. Knight e6. You can see this is a handy move for black in quite a few positions. Bishop h4. And now a5. So before white has time to finish developing, to get castled and consolidate, black is going to counterattack quickly against the white queen side. So c5, attacking the queen, queen c6, hitting g2, castles, ab, rook a4, rook b1, and once again, so just as in the last little variation we looked at, so too here, this bishop keeps becoming a target. And thanks to knight c5, bc5, rook h4 is the point. Black gets his pawn back and equalizes, and correspondence game that went this way finished very quickly, like this, and white took, and they called it a day. So black is equalizing there too. You can see why it took computers before this Karpov line got rehabilitated. All right, next try, c takes d5. So knight c3, bc3, knight b5, hitting all of these guys here. Knight e4, knight to d6, takes. So once again, we've got a funny position where white is up a pawn, but nevertheless, black seems to have good compensation. So this was a human game. This is Li Liam against Yu Yangyi, played in Danju, maybe this very same tournament, although at that point it would have been, I think, a slower time control and in person for sure. Anyway, that game eventually finished in a draw as well. White's, of course, not doing badly, but the a-pawn is going to drop at some point. The bishop on g5 is a little bit loose, and even when it gets to g3, if it does, it's going to be out of the game. So white played e4, which is good for the bishop on g5, but also gives black's bishop a bit more life as well. Anyway, that was eventually drawn, as I said, and let's now move on to what was played in our official game between Ding Liren and Wang Hao. So knight takes d5. All right, knight g5, b4. So white gets his piece back, queen to d8, bc5, and knight d to e6. Now this might seem wrong at first because, hey, doesn't h4 just win a piece? The answer, of course, is no. Knight c5 counterattacks the queen and clears e6 for the second knight. Before we go on with this, let me mention an alternative for white. Instead of h4, I would definitely take a look at castles, knight c5, queen to b1. So it's a very different approach. It's much less aggressive than what we're going to see in the game, but it's not a bad approach. It's a little bit more patient. White might have a little edge here, so time will tell. But like I said, it's just a very different approach from what we're going to see in the game. So h4, and now we get here. All right, so this, I think, is also a rich position for exploration. h5 has been played before, black went h6, and I think that game ends up transposing to our game. So I'm not sure how much independent significance that one has in the game. Knight f3 was played, so we'll look at that. But I would also mention a couple of other interesting ideas. One is to go rook h3, obviously intending rook to g3, maybe sometimes rook f3. And still another idea is to just go g4 and ram the pawns. So those moves have not been played, so it's room for exploration if you are interested in this variation with either color. All right, in the game we have knight to f3, and already I think black has to be a bit careful here. In the game, kind of surprisingly, Wang Hao immediately went astray. His next move is a little bit inaccurate, and then on the subsequent move, he just loses. So even though this whole variation is rather popular, by this point, there's been enough, let's say, thinning out of the branches that even a player of Wang Hao's caliber, and I'm sure his diligence, is capable of getting out of his prep or forgetting his prep. So what should black do here? Well, I think the only good move here is queen to a5 check. So this, I think, is critical. And now white's got a few options. King to e2. Well, okay, white could play knight to d2, but then it's not really clear what the point of knight to f3 was. So king moves are really going to be it, because if you go rook to d2, obviously knight to b3 is a problem. So let's take a quick look at a couple of options here. So if king to e2, black now goes f6, h5, e4, and this can quickly peter out to a draw. Well, white has a choice. So white could play knight to d2 or h6. So h6 is just fun, it's pretty, but it quickly ends the game. So takes, g6, rook h to g1, and black just plays queen to a3. And the problem is, as terrifying as it might appear, all it is a draw. So that's it. So queen f6, king h7, and there's no win. So that is one possibility for white. Of course, white wants more than just to make a quick draw. So in this position, I would say that the better try, after h5, e4, is to go knight to d2, then knight to g5. And here, white has, again, various options, but for this, I'll just refer you to the PGN. There's f4, that's one possibility, and there's h6, maybe f3, but f3, I think f3 is at best a slightly inferior version of f4. So f4 and h6 are what need to be explored. As far as I can tell, black gets his 000 equality in both cases, but one thing to know it's 000 when you're analyzing with a computer for hours. It's another thing to know it when you're at the board trying to work out all the details. Okay, so that's king to e2. It is also possible to play king f1, of course, but this I think is not too terribly dangerous. Black just goes queen to a4, and hitting the rook, hitting this. And it's not really clear that white has anything better than just going king to e1, which gives black the option of giving another check. So really, king to e2, I think, is the main try for white for whatever it's worth. And objectively, black is okay. Okay, well, let's see what happened in the game. Black played f6, which is very sensible. He's protecting the e5 pawn. And more than that, he's preventing knight to g5, which wasn't a threat. Well, it even was a threat, but now it's obviously definitely off limits. And he's rightly not worried about any discovered attacks on the d file. So there's no meaningful knight jump that's going to cause black any anguish. Even if black didn't have queen to a5 check, that would still be the case. So what's wrong with f6? Well, it is a little bit weakening, and white plays h5. So despite all of that, black is still more or less okay. Okay-ish after queen to a5 check. So knight to d2, queen takes a3, and the important thing for black is that h6 looks like it's just going to obliterate black's kingside, but he's just in time with queen to d3 to hold everything together. And if e4, then there's knight to d4, and then white can just resign. So this saves black here. So instead of h6, what white can do is castle, and should do. Let's say rook a to d8. And I think white has an edge here, but it's by no means fatal. Rook to b1 is possible. Maybe the best is just rook to a1, queen d3, trade, rook a7. Black defends the b pawn, and white doubles on the a file. And white's better. I mean, the knight on d5 is more meaningful than black's c5 and d3 knight combo. h6 is always kind of looming, and black's rooks are really not all that participatory. So it's definitely not winning for white, but white has a meaningful advantage at this point. So already, going back to the game here, even with best play, black's already in some difficulty. And after his next move, it's just over. So he plays h6, which, again, looks completely reasonable. So f6